All right, so episode 2, American politics. Gonna give ourselves another softball here. And,
Well, yes, we're going to tackle the single most important issue in the world today. It's a nice, easy, underhand lob for us, right?
At risk of just sounding like we're complaining a bunch about American politics, which really everyone that's into politics at all probably likes to do sometimes, I think we're probably going to try to give it a little bit more of a critical analysis here and there. Us up in Canada have a pretty different political experience. The one thing I noticed the most about American politics is that nothing really ever seems to change at all. I was following American politics. I started in 2004 is when I started really closely following the news. And other than the fact that everything has just gotten worse, I can't really notice any differences. Like, there's still debates over abortion and gun control and taxes, and it's just the same shit all the time. So I find I'm almost just really tired of it. Like, I can understand why people dislike politics so much, because if they had to live in that all the time, then I would revile it as well.
Yeah, I mean, there doesn't seem to be much that's changed. I guess when it comes to the stereotypical American issues of abortion, gun rights, taxes in general, and I guess the only thing that's really changed is now they're complaining about healthcare.
Right. Yeah.
And arguing about that. So I guess that's just going to go on forever now.
Right, yeah.
I mean, will there ever be a day when the Republican Party stops trying to repeal Obamacare?
Well, there might be a day when the Republican Party has no power at all if they lose Texas. But I think that, I don't know, people, like when I was in university, for the 1 year that I took a Canadian Politics 101 class, and my prof described Canada's political system as being like a benign dictatorship, basically. Like, if you have a majority-controlled government in Parliament, you can, as long as what you're doing, like, you can basically do whatever the hell you want. And the opposition is really just there for show a lot of the time. And yeah, that sucks. But at the same time, we seem to be able to actually do shit. And things change, and issues are just settled, and you don't have some province or state or whatever that's just, the state system seems so fractured that, for instance, the debate over gay marriage right now, where you can't just pass a federal law that says that gay people can get married, apparently. It has to be every single individual state, and there were some southern states that will just never pass those laws. So I don't think that you'll ever have every homosexual American will ever be able to get married, ever, probably. Maybe in some states or the majority, but I don't see it changing. And we settled that debate in the early 2000s, and everyone just forgot about it because it was fine.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we did have to vote. It was a province by province thing, but pretty much as soon as the federal government had a position on it, it was a done deal.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, yeah, that's fine. We don't really care. There were people who were annoyed about it, and that's fine. But from a purely sort of from the standpoint of what the charter has to say, there wasn't really much of a leg to stand on for people who wanted to be against gay marriage. I mean, you could say it's immoral or it's wrong or it'll hurt the family, but unfortunately the law says that you have to do things a certain way, and unless you have a legal argument, the family, in some vague sense, doesn't really matter.
No, and it shouldn't. I think, I don't know, we do have segments of the population that are like really, really, really against gay marriage and abortion, but it's such a small minority. I mean, I guess we have it easier here than you would in the States. There's so much more reactionary elements just culturally in that country that prevent progress. It seems, like the Tea Party, like they are just the quintessential reactionary political sort of group. I don't know. I just find it altogether very tiresome, just seeing it go on and on and on, and it just must be really frustrating living there. I think most Americans would be interested to know that we didn't actually get a Charter of Rights and Freedoms until, like, what was it, in the mid 80s? Late 80s?
Yeah, 84, I believe, or 86. It sort of was a process that took place sort of in conjunction with the repatriation of the charter, or the
Right.
Constitution, rather.
Well, the thing with American politics is that everything seems to be about the Constitution. It's always the Constitution, and this was a document that is from the 1700s, and it didn't address slavery. The people that wrote it were slave owners
and
themselves.
to be fair, it did. It was quite vague about it. I mean, they couldn't directly address slavery because it would have been probably extremely hypocritical. But, 3/5 of a person, or 3/8 of a person, or whatever. Excuse me for saying 3/5, thinking that slaves should be a majority of a human being. 3/8 of a person.
Was that? Oh, that's right. That was actually in the Constitution. And
yeah, because the whole point was that they were trying to figure out how to delegate electoral votes, right? And it was sort of in general by population, but then the slave owning states were like, well, we got all these slaves, shouldn't they count for something? And then the federal government or whoever was deciding this was like, okay, yeah, 3/8 of a person. That's how much they count for getting electoral votes and delegating those votes out.
I really love that they had the audacity to just say 3/8 instead of just half. Like, no, it can't be that generous. Jesus.
It is a bit of a salt in the wound, as it were.
So I just find it really odd that they're always referring to this document like it's the be all end all, and everything has to, like, the founding fathers this and the founding fathers that. Like, we don't go on off about John A. MacDonald and what John A. MacDonald would have wanted.
He was an unrecoverable drunk and a corrupt idiot at times. I mean, the country was founded, through a series of just sort of liquor-soaked meetings where you got everyone in the country who was the least bit important together, and we're like, okay, we're going to get incredibly shit-faced, but at the end of this, we have to actually figure out how to make a country work. And that worked. And you know what? Maybe a bit of that might help out America's malaise. I mean, if you got every single major political leader, like, just go down to the Caribbean or something and just get completely hammered for a weekend, but with the understanding that when they come back, they have to have some actual plan. That would probably be better than what they're doing now.
My dad always said that if what you're doing right now isn't working, try anything else. Doesn't matter what it is, just any other thing. And even if that's worse, what you try is worse, that's fine. At least now you know, right?
Yeah.
So I'd say that, yeah, sure, send him off to, the Caribbean. That would be fine.
Bahamas, it's a nice place.
And then we wouldn't have to deal with them for like a week. And that would be great.
Yeah, it'd be nice not to hear about some other stupid thing someone's doing in the news. It's very worrying what's been going on in the United States pretty much forever, it seems. I mean, I'm not that old, so I can't honestly think of a time when I wasn't kind of confused and worried about the whole political process there. I don't think it's... I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's continuously getting worse, but it does just seem like there's this constant malaise to everything where it doesn't really seem to... There doesn't ever seem to be that breakthrough that's constantly being promised. Like the idea of hope, and we're going to turn a corner, and things are going to be different from now on, and then they're just not.
I think that, like, there will never be a more inspiring politician than Obama. He was really inspiring. And my God, to see where he's come from then, Like, I remember with this whole net neutrality being castrated issue in the news right now, Democracy Now! Played a clip of Obama where he was saying, like, I believe in net neutrality, the internet has to be open and free and fair, and we have to treat all traffic equally, and, you know, he was taking a really firm stance. And I was, for a second, really excited. Like, wow, the old Obama is back, the pre-president Obama is back, and he's got his, you know, vigor back. And when the clip finished, Amy Goodman said, and that was Barack Obama in 2007, ... And I was so crushed. So it's really surprising. Like, either every politician ever is, you know, well, they say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. But I think it really has more to do with the constraints and the pressures of the American political system on the individual politicians.
Yeah, I do. I think that it. Yes, but if that's the case, then Obama, being a decent human being, should have told people as much. At some point, he should come out and say, "Look, I had these dreams. They were sincere, but the American political system cannot sustain them. I want to do this. You elected me wanting to do this. But our political process is not one that will allow for that." And perhaps he could say, you know, that's a good thing or a bad thing. You know, maybe my ideas were too crazy and shouldn't be done. But if he doesn't do that, then he's culpable with the whole process.
Yeah, and it becomes his fault.
Yeah, because, well, I mean, if he comes out and says, look, I can't do it. I'm not a good enough person to fight against an entire system. I can't do it alone.
And that's true.
I think that is true. But he hasn't said that. He hasn't come out with any kind of statement along those lines. And I don't think any politician would, because it would be such a risky thing to do. I mean, he would be basically coming out and admitting that all those people who voted for me were wrong.
Well, not to mention, in American politics, it seems necessary, at least from the perspective of right-wing people, that you have to be strong and you have to face your opponents and you posturize and all that. And if you were to come and say, well, America, I need your help, you would be spineless, and that wouldn't be... So
I don't know. I think that like you said, with the whole, you know, try something that you haven't done before if things aren't working. I think it might work. I mean, Americans certainly are, it's not like Americans are enamored with the bombastic process as it currently exists. Americans don't seem to like their government at all.
No.
So why not give it a go? I mean, what's the worst that'll happen? What? Literally, what would happen at this point if Obama were to come out and say, you know, our political process is not capable of sustaining your dreams?
Well, I think he should come out and say that. Whether or
if
not
it's true, I mean, definitely. But
well, you know, I think to some extent we have to take into consideration that a lot of the problems just have to do with capitalism and aren't necessarily specific to the American political system.
I'd say yes and no. I mean, yes, in the economic issues in the broadest sense are, but no, in that the policies that people actually want to implement are not impossible under capitalism. I mean, Americans could have, you know, healthcare. They could have free education. They could have like an entire system of social welfare that provides all these wonderful things that would make a healthier, happier society. They could have a criminal justice system that isn't based around locking people up for as long as possible. They could legalize all the drugs that aren't really all that harmful. All of those things can be done under capitalism. The thing, though, is that they're not, and I think that it's a political issue for capitalism, not an economic one anymore. That what we're looking at here is kind of the inability of capitalism to sort of propel society forward in a healthy way.
Well, I mean, you compare like the golden age of capitalism, like the 60s and the 70s, or even before that, you know, when they were building infrastructure and universities, and they had a decent social security net, and an average guy could get a decent unionized job and provide decently for his family.
Well, not even unionized. I mean, just a woman working at a restaurant as a waitress, you could actually like pay for a house with that kind of job.
Yeah.
40 years ago.
And now the economic circumstances are such where that's unthinkable.
Oh yeah, it's not going to happen. It's impossible.
No, and like a lot of the spirit that America was built on, like the nation.
No one pays for their houses anymore.
No.
You die before that happens.
Yeah, but nation building projects don't seem to be possible anymore in America. Like they're getting in these pissing contests over who can cut the most spending.
Well, that's what I mean. It's not like the economy has shrunk since the 1960s. It's gotten better. The economy is doing better. Individuals in the United States and in Canada and generally around the world are more productive today than they were
Many
30
times
years
more.
ago. And yet somehow there's this inability to move anywhere. It's like we've sort of that kind of inertia has just sort of gotten sucked up and
Up to the rich.
yeah, well, that is basically what has happened, and so it isn't. I mean, when people say like what capitalism can and can't do, I think that they need to understand the difference between what capitalism could do and what capitalism won't do
Or wants to do.
Yeah. There's just it's all possible. So a reformist who looks at capitalism and says there's enough money in the system for us to do all these wonderful things. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, there is, but yet we're not doing it. So there's got to be something else going on, and there are interests that, particularly in the case of the United States, run the country that aren't particularly interested in those projects anymore.
Well, the state, you could argue, is just a tool of the ruling class, really, anyways. They're the ones that will inevitably own the state and operate the state if they're the most powerful group in society.
Yeah, but there is kind of, but there's a contradiction there because the rest of society does have to exist somehow, sort of eke out an existence. And the idea of no political representation at all is disturbing to people and would promote social unrest. So there's sort of this balancing act in every country on earth between the interests of the ruling class and that understanding that there needs to be enough of a social contract to keep people happy enough that it won't cause problems for the ruling class.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot.
But there doesn't seem to be much of an interest in maintaining a sweet spot anymore. It's not like they're coming together and saying, why don't we just provide them what they want because we can afford it anyway, and we'll just keep raking in lots and lots of money.
And it wouldn't even cost them that much at all.
No, and in some cases it would cost less.
Right.
I mean, we've been debating in Canada the idea of a guaranteed fixed income.
Oh yeah, Tom Mulcair.
Yeah, and a few
put that
other people.
forward.
It's been one of those ideas that's just sort of been bopping around a bit. Mm-hmm. And it is cheaper than like all the social programs and welfare and things like that because you have to employ social workers who take care of homeless people and have to deal with funding, and then you have like retirement funds that need to be maintained and paid for. But if you had just a fixed income allowance, then you could get rid of that entire network of bureaucracy and pay people directly that money.
That seems to make abundant sense.
Well, it does, but for some reason we're not doing it, and I think the main reason is that it undermines the political relevance of capitalism. That it makes capitalism, the idea of capitalism, it divorces capitalism from politics, because basically then you're presenting people with a world in which fundamental aspects of capitalism are not really part of their day-to-day lives. You could just live whatever life you want and do stuff, and sort of that impetus of either work or die isn't there anymore.
Right. Because if you made, $17,500 a year no matter what, then, I'm sure there would be plenty of people that would just do that. And, it would still probably be cheaper than paying for the current welfare state that we have.
Yeah, some people might. I mean, I imagine a decent number of people would try to start their own business or something.
Yeah.
Or go into whatever career it is they actually wanted to do. If there's someone out there who wanted to be an artist of one sort or another, they could just do that instead.
That does sound
And you
really
wouldn't
nice.
have to have like all these myriad government programs promoting the arts so much. You could
Right.
just say, look, if you want to paint or you want to make music or you want to make movies, you could just do that through the guaranteed income.
That's quite a nice thought, actually, when you put it that way.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. There's so many different things that you could just do away with because you wouldn't need it anymore. There wouldn't be this desire for it. You wouldn't have to specifically go around the country looking for creative people to, patronize through government programs. If they really wanted to travel around the country singing folk music, they could just go and do that.
Well, I think that the idea of a guaranteed fixed income is the kind of thing that would be absolutely preposterous to propose in the United States.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the idea of a national political party leader, like even discussing it.
Even Obama.
Anyone. I mean, anyone at all. The idea, it would be preposterous. And I mean, to be fair, the United States only has two parties. So they're at kind of a loss as to who exactly it is that would be, proposing this. Although, again, in the States, I'll ask you a simple question. We've got Obama, right, for the Democrats. Who is currently running the Republican Party?
The first name that comes to mind is John Boehner.
Well, that's a good answer, and I'll accept it because I don't know either. But that's something that I find very strange about the United States, how they have this... It's weird how much they focus on their political parties, and yet the actual political parties themselves don't seem to matter at all in the process. It's like once the candidate gets elected, the party just disappears.
No, they have a party whip, and they
No, they don't.
Yeah, I think so.
No, they don't.
Really?
Yeah, the Democratic members vote for all kinds of things. I mean, the Republicans generally vote along their own lines, but that's for more just the I think that's more of just a strategy more than a sincere policy.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I hardly think Republican politicians are particularly morally upstanding people.
Usually not.
It's kind of a joke at this point, the idea of a Republican being found doing something explicitly against their stated moral values.
Yeah, I've lost count of how many times I've seen that happen in the news, so yeah, it does happen. I think it's kind of odd that for one thing, it's the presidential elections are agonizingly long, and
getting longer.
Jesus, they were already talking about 2016 right away.
Just now? I mean, hell, I've been hearing about that for the last few months. Just little voices in the wind of who could be the next candidate, and
and then you have these.
Will they run or won't they?
You have the primaries are sort of built into the elections, and once the primaries start, it's everyone starts paying attention to it, and that doesn't happen at all here. I mean,
we have the conventions get filmed and they're on CPAC, and that's about it. And people might mention a significant policy decision, like in the last one where the Liberal Party decided, or a recent one where the Liberal Party decided that they would legalize marijuana if elected.
Right.
And that was like a news story for a day.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, in the convention they voted on this, so that's kind of interesting. And then on to real news instead of it's the fucking primary in this state you don't care about is going to have a vote that won't even matter, but it's the first one, so we're here.
Well, yeah, and then you're just following all of the asinine comments that all these random politicians are making the entire way through, and news organizations will cover it all the time. And Jesus, I remember when Jack Layton passed away, and the NDP had the new, people were running to be the new party leader. It was considered such unimportant news that it was interrupted by some major news story on CBC about some murder case or whatever. And, like, that would never happen in the States.
Yeah, I think the only major story they did on the NDP leadership race was just how boring it was.
It was pretty boring.
Like how, well, they're all kind of the same, and they all are basically friendly to each other.
Yeah,
There's not really much
and
there.
Tom Mulcair is just obviously the most skilled politician, so there
He
you
was
go.
the one who could speak French the best, and we had gotten a lot of people in Quebec, so he seemed like a decent choice.
And Brian Topp couldn't really speak
He couldn't
French.
speak a word of French, so it was like, well, it seemed kind of like a dick move to vote in a new leader who can't speak any French at all.
Yeah,
So-
that wouldn't have boded well.
So we'll stick with the guy who seems okay and can speak French. That's good enough, right?
Well, I get really. I think all Americans probably get sort of terrified once the primaries start coming up. It's like, oh no, it's election season again, and I have to listen to all this asinine bullshit from all these idiotic politicians that aren't even going to get elected anyways. And why should their comments matter at all? Like, why should Michelle Bachmann's comments during the 2008 primaries have mattered at all?
I don't know. It's not like she was ever going to win.
No, thank God.
Well, no, but I mean, that's the thing I find more annoying than the length of time or the myopicness of the reporting is how they treat everything as kind of this, it could really happen option.
Right.
Like, oh, well, you know, given the right freaking position of the moon and stars, maybe this person could win. And what would that be like? And
Well, or they'll just like reference some poll where Herman Cain was in the lead,
I don't
and
know why
all of a sudden he's gonna win.
I don't know why they weren't just like, look, Mitt Romney has the most money, so he's probably going to win. He has the most support of the party, the Republican Party's electoral machine, so he's probably going to win.
You know, it's
So
obvious
there,
why
done.
they didn't do that.
Done.
It's obvious why they didn't do that because if they did do that, then no one has a reason to watch the primaries.
Yeah, but no one has a reason to watch them anyway. It undermines their whole political process by trivializing something, by making the most trivial aspects seem important. It basically turns people off of the thing altogether.
It does, and maybe that's intentional.
Well, it doesn't have to be intentional. I mean, they could just be desperate for news.
Well, yes.
And election primaries are basically just fill in the blank news. You don't have to really do any real like journalistic work. You don't have to investigate anything. You just need to, know the names of the candidates and the state you happen to be in at the time, and then rattle off some numbers and probabilities, and you can pretend like you've actually done some real work. And it can, fill up the news cycle, essentially.
Well, I guess when you have 24/7 news cycles, you have to fill in the blanks a lot because there's not that much news happening all of the time.
No, I guess not. I mean, you'd think there would be. It's not like they have to do American news only.
No, and they don't. There are plenty of things you can report on. It doesn't have to just be murders and shootings and the last idiotic thing that John Boehner said.
Yeah, I guess. He seems like an okay guy, to be honest.
I think he is despicable.
John Boehner?
Yes.
Really?
He what's that reactionary conservative?
He just seems like just a politician. Like he just seems like a partisan hack who would say or do anything for his party.
Well,
that doesn't really, honestly, I don't see that as particularly remarkable.
Well, he is a little bit more distinguished than that. He has been a featured speaker at ALEC. I can't remember what that stands for, but that's like the secretive business lobby that writes all these bills that get passed through American Legislative Executive Committee, I think.
Wow.
But anyways, back in the George Bush days, they have this sort of featured speaker at their annual conference every year who is sort of like the poster boy for the capitalist class in politics at that point. George Bush spoke at it, and John Boehner spoke at it, and I think Eric Cantor might have spoke at it as well. But it's a real who's who of business friendly hacks.
Well, if that's the case, then sure, he does sound like maybe he is a cut above. I
He's
don't know.
not just an average
Honestly,
hack.
it's hard to pay attention to American politics sometimes.
It's draining.
Yeah, it's hard. It's just very, very tedious to me.
Yeah, and every time you sort of have a glimmer of hope, it just gets dashed. Like, I remember with the whole Edward Snowden leaks, there was a federal judge that declared that the NSA warrantless wiretapping was unconstitutional and borderline Orwellian, was his exact words, I think. And everyone on the left was like, oh, great, this is awesome. Like, we don't have to maybe deal with this anymore. Like, maybe this is the beginning of the end to this obviously illegal and very creepy program. And nope, what this federal judge or state judge, I don't even know, what he said didn't matter, and it just got overruled, and there was some other judge that said, no, it's perfectly legal, and then that was that, and it didn't matter. So, there you go.
Yeah, I don't understand. I don't understand how their judges work. I mean, the idea of electing judges just seems bizarre to me.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing we don't have in Canada.
That judges would be political at all. It just seems kind of like wrong.
It does seem wrong. The judiciary is supposed to be the sort of stable, predictable backbone of the government. It's not supposed to pander to whatever the public is feeling at the time. It doesn't make sense that they would be elected.
Well, they're supposed to just interpret the legal system and not pretend like they're interpreting it, but really just enforcing some political position. You know, like if we were to look at the charter or whatever and determine on the basis of that the legality of abortion, you wouldn't say like, well, the charter says this, but my party's position is that, so it doesn't really matter, so I'm going to vote against it.
Yeah, to have party affiliations at all with judges seems like it defeats the point almost.
Well, I know, then they're always, in the States particularly, they're going on and on about the separation of powers and things like that. You have the executive, you have the legislative, and you have the judicial, but the judicial is political, which means that political parties have a role in it, which means there is a direct connection between them and every other branch. But I guess that's the massive oversight that the glorious, all-knowing founding fathers forgot, which was that political parties happened.
Right.
And it like that more than anything else, I think, sets the American political system apart.
Did they not have political parties when the country was founded?
Not really. I don't think they did. I mean, you'd have people who disagree on things, but I think the idea was that American politicians would be loyal to the republic itself and never to some other political party. Like, political parties were kind of almost traitorous or treasonous in concept, that the idea of having mixed loyalties would be in some way wrong and antithetical to the American principle of government.
Right.
And yet somehow their political system seems more well adjusted to a two-party system than any other country on earth.
Depressingly so.
Yeah, they seem to have of that oversight, I guess, seems to have allowed political parties to run amok in their system and essentially run the entire country. Assuming that it was ever even possible that you could have like this abstract just loyalty to the Republic in America and stuff like that.
Well, Americans perpetually do that. Like we were saying before, it's all about the founding fathers, it's all about the Constitution, it's all about America, it's all about loving, this liberty and freedom and all that. And it's almost like it's a pissing contest between the Democrats and the Republicans of like who can convince people that they stand for those abstract things better than the other side. And instead of just being about issues or what people want to do, and as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't fucking matter what the Constitution said in the 1700s. I mean, if it still makes sense, good. If it doesn't, then get rid of it and change it.
Sure, if a law can be justified today, then it's justifiable today. Mm-hmm. And that's about it.
Well, there's a reason why they took out the part of the Constitution that called slaves 3/8 of one human.
Oh, yeah, and they replaced it with a series of confusing laws and then said you couldn't have slaves anymore.
I thought it was funny. A few years ago, the Republicans were doing, I believe it was one of their famous filibusters, where they were, holding up any progress whatsoever by continuously opening their stupid noise holes. And they read the entire Constitution on the Senate floor or the House floor, word for word, just, because what else were they going to read? And it was a political stunt.
Sam I am.
And they forgot to leave out the parts that were taken out, and they talked about how slaves were worth only that much of a regular person. And they're like, the news outlets were saying, yeah, guys, that's not part of the Constitution anymore. But on the other hand, I mean...
Well, come on. I mean, that's not really indicative of anything. If they were reading from, like, an old phone book, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it is amusing that, both of the parties there sort of drape themselves in the Constitution and in freedom and all that crap, that they would be so sort of blind. But, they wouldn't notice, or they wouldn't catch themselves, they wouldn't say something. But maybe after 8 hours of reading nothing but gibberish. I wonder if they can do that. If they can just make noises
when they're filibustering.
Yeah, they don't actually have to say words.
Is it a rule? Like, can I just say "wah"?
What if you were to get a guitar out and just play? Does that still count? Or better yet, does it have to be because it has to be a filibuster? You have to be speaking. So is it like only trumpets or trombones or something? Because you still have to have air coming out of your mouth.
Oh, you could do scatting, like jazz singers.
Oh, yeah, that'd be good,
that probably
too.
Counts as, that's close enough to talking, right?
I don't know. Could it just be the same word said over and over and over again? Like the same sentence, just hour after hour. I guess it's more just filling up time without going insane.
What? Can you filibuster things in Canada?
Yeah, you can. Although the rules are stricter, usually. Our political system is based on a lot of traditions, and generally speaking, we follow those traditions. But sometimes, if there's an issue of mild importance or whatever, people can filibuster. Although there's almost always an explicit limit to it.
Right.
The irony in the States is that they almost never actually go to a filibuster anymore, because the other party. And by the party, I mean the Democratic Party is usually too scared to actually have that happen, because it would be, I don't know, a gaffe on their part to allow a filibuster to happen. So that if they don't have the super majority vote they need, they won't even bother pushing it to the point where a filibuster is necessary.
Huh.
Even though I don't see why they shouldn't. I mean, why not just let these guys keep talking until they fall over?
I'm sure a lot of Americans would prefer that.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what would be better than what they have now right now, as far as anything you could do to the Senate or the House of Representatives. I mean, I'm not one of those people who thinks you shouldn't vote. I do think everyone should vote, but I think that voting is something you have to do for something, not against something. Like when you're trying to elect somebody, and particularly when you do elect somebody, you're investing in them the power and the privilege to act in your name. And if you don't think anyone you have to choose from deserves that, then there's no one to choose, which means that you should probably not vote for the people available. Once again, I don't think you should not vote, but just spoil your ballot if it comes to that.
Well,
at least show up to the polling booth.
Well, on another note, I think one thing we haven't really talked much about, which is one of the most defining characteristics of American politics, is money. Corporations are people, my friend, said Mitt Romney.
Unfortunately, he did say that, yes. It really undermined his credibility as a human being.
Yes, it did. But I think that you can't deny that America...
Although they're not humans when you kill them, as I'm sure Mitt Romney would be very happy to say.
I love that quote. I think a corporation will be a person as soon as Texas executes one. It's pretty on the ball.
Yeah.
But I think, obviously in any country in the world, the more money that you have, the more successful at politics you will be. but that seems to be much more pronounced in America, especially since Citizens United.
Yeah, it did basically provide a direct link between money and political success. I think it did for the political process what advertising does for just general business.
Yeah.
It made a direct link between money and success.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fantastic for capitalism because it provides, much like, personally, I think advertising is the honest expression of capitalism in society. Money equals more advertising. You don't have to worry about, reality at all to limit your expressions. And in the same way now in American politics especially, you don't have to worry about the truth of what you have to say to limit your political success. You don't have to worry about whether or not you have an audience even. You can essentially create one with enough money. And it just allows for this sort of free flow of finances to determine who gets elected to what. I think it's a fundamental hypocrisy of American politics that there's this desire to do this. There's a desire to have money be influential in the political system, and yet this appeal to the American people as if they were the ones making the final choice. They're being told that it is fundamental for us to be able to spend as much money as we have to tell you what to think. But we can't tell you what to think because you are the true rulers of this system.
Well, that's obviously just a ploy, though.
Yeah, it's just rhetoric. I think it's rhetoric in both cases, really, because, both parties want to win, but inevitably only one of them has more money.
I think I should probably interject at this point. For our listeners that are not familiar with Citizens United, it was the semi-recent Supreme Court ruling in the United States that allowed for unlimited sums of money to be spent in elections, and there was no cap on spending or donations or any of that.
Yeah, here in Canada, there are very explicit caps on donations, spending, and until recently, and probably I think again in the future, there was actual public funds given based upon how many votes you got.
And that was really controversial when Stephen Harper got rid of that.
Some of it. It's sort of being phased out. I don't know if it'll ever be entirely gotten rid of, because I think it's good for any political system to have that, because it allows for even a party that doesn't win any seats to have some benefit to running a campaign.
Instead of it just being a sinkhole for money and time.
Yeah, like instead they can say, look, if we can get 50,000 votes across the country, that's so many dollars that we'll be able to use to put forward our positions. That's time and effort we can then spend on other things that we actually care about, and not just like desperately running campaigns and maybe one day getting a seat somewhere.
And which is even more like pissing up a rope when you're in the United States, because of the two parties are so ingrained in the political process that they're just a part of it now. And you don't have a third party, which they really, really, really desperately need.
Well, now, to be fair, this isn't going to be particularly fair on my part, but to be fair, all this money and all this focus on two parties is extremely effective. The political system of the United States works very well at disenfranchising the population, and it works very well at enforcing the interests of capitalism.
Well, they do.
It doesn't really work very well when it comes to making people feel good about their politicians.
Or actually having a voice in what happens.
Yeah, but that is an incidental detail at the end of the day. And it is, and we all kind of know it is. It's sort of this unspoken understanding that politicians don't listen to people because that's not what they're there to do.
Yeah.
We wish they would. We would like it if we could just say, yes, that's what Canadian politicians are supposed to be doing all the time. It's just they don't. And we know why they don't, because they've been paid off, because they have actual interests that have the money to enforce a decision.
I saw a picture once where the suits of Barack Obama and John Boehner, much like a Formula One racer, had all of their sponsoring corporations sort of stitched onto their suits. And it was a pretty telling photograph, because they really are just in the pockets of the lobbyists. And I mean, you don't bite the hand that feeds you, right?
Well, not usually. Although it seems that the hand that feeds you bites you in the case of Barack Obama.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to matter how good he is to Wall Street. Wall Street just still hates him for some reason.
Well, yeah, he's a Democrat.
Well, so what? They'd be smart to put their support behind him.
Well, a lot of them did during the last election, and they were right to do so.
Well, I don't just mean that. I mean for the sake of social stability.
Right.
I think it's stupid to promote divisiveness when what you want is stability.
Yeah.
I mean, if Wall Street just wants to make lots of money and not go to jail and just keep making money, and that's it, like they just want to make money and be left alone, then the whole issue of like Democrats and Republicans is an incredibly stupid one.
It's entirely irrelevant, yeah. Although, on the other hand, I think any Wall Street banker probably knows that for all of the, pro-business policies that Democrats will put forward, the Republicans will put even more insane ones forward than the Democrats would. So they stand to make more money if a Republican gets in, and that is really all they care about anyways. So of course they would tend towards the quote-unquote right when both parties are abundantly obviously right of center.
Well, I've never really understood the whole left-right thing. Not because I don't think there is one, but I think that it's more just a matter of where the individual in question is and compared to the parties that are discussing on the political spectrum. I mean, we are both left of the Democrats and Republicans, so we would consider both of those parties right-wing.
Right.
But someone who considers themselves right of the Republican Party wouldn't. It's really just a matter of, it's just too subjective to me.
In my view, I think the sort of social issues that are sort of hot button issues in the news and for people just generally are genuinely more attractive because they cut to sort of the emotions of people, and people are attracted to it for that reason. And economic issues are a lot more difficult to understand, just generally. If you would ask any evangelical Christian voter in the United States what were the two most important issues to them, I would reckon that they would say abortion and gun control.
But would you say that's sincere? That they sincerely believe that?
Or what? They're just told to...
No, but I mean, you characterize it as a distraction, right? And I mean, if they sincerely believe that abortion rights, gun control, or gay marriage, or whatever issue is their most important one, and if that's what they really think, then that's fine. I think they're incredibly stupid, but if that's a sincere position that they hold to, I don't have any problem with that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, why are they thinking that in the first place? Because their church has told them to think that. I don't think it's legitimately the person that cares about abortion more than unemployment, who happens to be unemployed, has obviously had ideas implanted into their heads.
You're making this out as if it's like a thing that is entirely imposed upon them. It could be, as has been recently shown, that they could just come up with a new thing, and it fits within that whole idea. The recent thing is providing for contraceptives through Obamacare.
Oh, God.
That is not something that anybody was talking about before.
Right.
Contraceptives haven't been an issue for like 40 years or more, and yet somehow it was just like out of the blue. Well, of course, contraceptives are against religious, blah, 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 blah. And off they go with this whole new idea. So I don't think it's just a matter of them being told what to think. I think there is a sincere, although incredibly idiotic, sort of worldview that informs their decision making.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the United States, you have really mental religious attitudes where, their view of the world is so incredibly at odds with mainstream society that they have their own books, television shows, sports teams, cartoons, video games, rock music, everything, where they just cannot come to terms with modern society and would, need to stay in their little bubble. And these are people that sometimes inevitably get elected to Congress and are making laws for everyone else. And I'm, we do have that really reactionary religious element in Canada, but it's negligibly small, although, with perhaps the exception of our Prime Minister.
Well, sure, but I mean, in our case, we've had a religious fanaticism on the left as well. I mean, the NDP was essentially founded by Christian socialists.
Were they?
Oh yeah, Tommy Douglas and all that. Like they were very religious. The idea was that as Christians, it was just only right and proper that we provide this social network for everyone. That people welfare would be provided to everybody because that's the Christian thing to do. And they made it was very, very important that be understood, that we would, do this for Christian reasons. That ended up being phased out later on as sort of just more pragmatic politics came in.
Right.
But it's entirely possible to have religious fanaticism, essentially, or a focus on religion, take place in any part of the spectrum of politics.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mention that, it reminds me of... like in Latin America during the 80s, where you'd have liberation theology, where they were Christian Marxists, where they were organizing these revolutionary movements, partially identifying with Christianity and Scripture. And so, yeah, I mean, just because you're religious doesn't mean you're right-wing by any means.
Sure, but it is, I mean, getting back to the whole American politics specifically, it is odd. And it is an outlier that American religious political life is so right-wing and so significant in their sort of political discourse.
I find it funny that... Okay, so let's compare Canada and the United States. You have America, where the Constitution explicitly bans any combination of church and state. They are separate. That is fucking set in stone. And yet, in spite of that, you have the Ten Commandments up at how many state legislative buildings, and political laws and decisions that are informed by religion. To Canada, on the other hand, where we actually don't have an official separation of church and state officially, and yet it's just not an issue. Where it's, we're maybe going by Canadian politics functions on tradition and the kinds of things like, we've always done it this way, and sure, maybe it's not explicitly a law, but it's just not on to mix your own personal religious beliefs with something else, or with political life. And that's just sort of a tradition that's unwritten that we just sort of respect and abide by, and that's just sort of civil and respectful. Whereas, in spite of the fact that Americans have it written down on paper, it doesn't seem to matter.
Yeah, I mean, we have actually got state-funded church schools in our country,
which is a piss-off, by the way.
And yet it is a piss-off, but it almost undermines the religion in our case more than it undermines the state.
How so?
Well, because they seem more unable to support their own ideas.
That's a good point.
Than us. Whereas the government can provide public schools to everyone. Sure, who cares? That doesn't matter. But somehow the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches can't be bothered to pay for their own damn schools.
Well, I don't know. If there's a tax break, you'll take it even if you deserve it or not, right?
But why should they? I mean, if they're honest religious
Christians,
wouldn't they want to be as distinct and not reliant upon the government as possible, so that they could be this sort of separate agency in society? I mean, the same thing in the States, right? Where tax exempt status for churches is requires you to not take part in political activities,
Which
right?
is such bullshit because they obviously do.
Well,
take
they
part in-
obviously do, but wouldn't the more honest thing be to say we want to take part in politics, therefore we won't accept tax-exempt status?
That would be the honest thing, yes.
Well, yet they don't.
So, Mackenzie, why do you suppose religion is such a big deal in American politics? Why is it expressed so acutely there as opposed to other countries?
Well, I mean, a lot of the current stuff in the States goes back to like the 1950s as almost like a reaction to the Soviet Union's sort of stance of being totally non-religious and atheistic and very disinterested and antithetical to religion. So America takes on all these attitudes and dispositions that can kind of create a total disagreement between them and the Soviet Union. So on every issue, they can be on the other side of it.
Right, the Soviets are atheists, they're religious. The Soviets are communists, they're capitalists.
And they're not just capitalists, they're the most capitalist. Because you can't have, some state government at that point. You have to get rid of it all because the communists in the Soviet Union have only state economy,
Right.
So you get rid of all of those kinds of things and you break apart the entire process to make yourself more and more of a direct, almost like just mirror image of the Soviet Union.
It's funny how you can sort of lose sight of these things as years go by, where, the religious section of American politics does come from that, but nobody really, people, a lot of all young people these days weren't even alive when the Soviet Union was existing at all, and they were just given this shit sandwich of crappy politics, and they just have to deal with it, and they don't necessarily understand why.
We're all still sort of experiencing the fallout of the end of the Cold War. Although to be fair, a lot of this stuff has been more recent. There's been a lot more of a reactionary trend in American politics in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I'll say.
Like the whole 9/11 thing, and then after that, it seemed like things seemed to accelerate a bit that way. But it is interesting. We're talking about America, so the whole issue is, what are the things that make America unique in the world? And it's all stuff that kind of it almost is like a parody of capitalism. Like, particularly when you're listening to the way Republicans talk. They talk like they actually want people who are poor to die.
Yeah.
Like there is this. It's very strange sometimes how America has turned itself into a caricature politically, and it doesn't seem like it can get out of that because it seems to be almost. It's like it's convinced by its own propaganda that it's correct in all things, no matter what. My country first, or that kind of thing. Right or wrong, America.
America!
Yeah, well, that whole attitude is very unique to the United States. Most other countries, even countries that have, a very nationalistic attitude, usually have just this idea that there are things that our government can do that would just be wrong, and it doesn't really matter that it's our government.
Yeah, but all of a sudden, if you're an American criticizing what the government's doing, you're anti-American. And
which is funny because they also all hate the government.
How does that work?
But here in Canada, we have a completely different definition for government. The government is the political party in power at the time. Right. And for them, the government is like this weird, ethereal being that doesn't really exist. It's like this spirit, the ghost of America, haunting the halls of power and not really there. But you can appeal to it. You get the Ouija board out in the Senate floor, and you can ask the founding fathers what to do. That kind of thing, where it just sort of that whatever it is they think they're talking about isn't real, but it is still sort of appealed to so consistently that it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah. Well, America always really seems to, throughout its entire history, really sort of mirrors, and I don't know if it's because America just happens to be the biggest economy in the world, or if there's something about the country specifically that it really mirrors the ups and downs of capitalism, where you clearly saw the golden age in the 60s and 70s where things actually sort of worked, and starting in the 80s with Reagan, you saw everything just fall apart and go to shit.
Well, mostly. I mean, they still had, like in the 60s and 70s, you had the civil rights movement. Blacks were not treated very well. And yet, I think that it almost stays consistent with this idea that the United States was the country. It's not so much that they're the capitalist country that is the furthest ahead. It's like they're the capitalist country that is the most stereotypical of capitalism at the time.
Yes.
It's like if racism is an issue, then America will be the most racist.
Yeah.
If religion is a problem in the world today, then America will be the most religious. It's just they seem to embody the problems of the day, and that may be because they're such an important economy, but I also think it's because they are kind of, it's almost like a feedback where anything that becomes notable in capitalism is almost obligated to become notable as twice as much in America.
Well, it's funny how the American economy can be so much more productive and profitable and have so much more money than any of its European or Canadian counterparts, and yet they have such shit services. Like in Europe, you actually have good public transportation and light rail and social services and actual health care. And their economies are a fraction of the size, and it doesn't seem to fucking matter. And I don't know if it's just some... I can't even quite wrap my head around that. Like, why is it that they just haven't sorted out that problem where there's obviously enough money to pay for health insurance for everyone, or even a basic income for everyone in the United States, and it's just not even plausible for some reason.
Well, like I said, it's America has to be doubly as capitalistic as any other country on earth. They have to be the paragon of greed and corruption, because if anyone else manages to ever upset them in their I don't know, top of the hill or whatever you want to call it, they won't be
as capitalists.
Yeah, they won't be the most important country on earth anymore at that point.
Right.
I mean, if anyone else ever manages to be worse than they are at those kinds of things, then they'll be unseated. I mean, at least philosophically, right?
Well, it's funny that when you look at the fact that America is the most productive economy in the world, and yet they have the worst healthcare system and spend the most money on it by far. They have the worst social services. They have the highest teen pregnancy rate. They have higher unemployment than most other countries. And it just seems like for all of the money that they have, they do an awfully poor job of managing it.
And yet somehow they're able to spend a lot of time on politics. It's on the news all the time. I mean, the world can't stop being told just how important every little thing is in America.
Every stupid word that comes out of every backwash reactionary politician's mouth from Tennessee.
If some 8th-rate politician running for president gives someone a corn dog in Iowa, there has to be a camera taking a picture of them, and it has to be on the 24-hour news.
Yep.
It's every little thing, and that is possibly the most annoying part about it.
This is such a convoluted issue that I don't even know that we can come to like a conclusion with this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say...
what do we even say?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I said overthrow the government, I don't even know if that would work right now.
Well, then you'd just be appealing to like the Freemen movement and like those dickheads in...
Yeah, the militia types.
Yeah.
And get rid of it.
Get rid of the government. Well, I don't know. I mean, Congress is sitting at like, what, less than 10% approval rating?
I don't think they've been over single digit for a while now.
It's almost like anything else would be better, and yet still they view their government as being the sacred embodiment of democracy.
There's a lot of things that could be worse. But once again, I just want to say and be clear about this, that what America does well is represent a minority of its population who are incredibly wealthy.
There is no one in the world that does that better.
No, and I think that that's why they're able to maintain that precarious and bizarre state of affairs. because every other country has compromised with its population more than the United States. It's
Right.
made more of an effort to be socially acceptable than the United States.
And in the U.S., the general population is just sort of an accomplice to whatever the rich wants to do.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you have to vote because it's your duty, and then
And democracy.
and every 4 years you cast a ballot, and then shut up about politics other than watching the news.
And
So-
doing what the news tells you and believing what the news tells you,
Well,
who are owned by very large
to
corporations.
some degree, it doesn't really, honestly, for the most part, it doesn't really matter what people believe in the United States. You can believe whatever the hell you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference. It's not like the political system is actually directly involved in your beliefs. If I believe that an idea is good and I vote for it, well, nothing might happen. I mean,
Nothing probably will happen.
yeah, I mean, if I vote, if as many millions of Americans apparently did, if I vote for change and vote for a politician who is promising change and change doesn't occur, then I just get screwed over, and then the political machine just keeps rolling on.
Yeah, I mean, and then what are you going to do? I mean,
Nothing. I mean, what are you going to do? Not vote?
well, I mean, I remember a conversation we had a few days earlier. I was talking about how, sure, Obama has been really disappointing, but that Elizabeth Warren woman is really, she could really take on the corporations, and
I
she
agree.
has. And you said, you know what, that you would have said the same thing about Obama when he was running for president, and you were fucking right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think Elizabeth Warren is a fantastic potential candidate. I don't think she has a hope in hell of actually becoming president, and by that I mean I don't think she has a hope in hell of getting the Democratic nomination.
because she's against corporations.
Yeah, and more than Obama, I think she's kind of an unknown element.
Right.
That they don't like. They wouldn't be.
And she's
clear.
still white. She's really off on.
Yeah,
on the
but
other
I mean,
side.
they can't vote for Obama for a third term, so you're gonna have to pick someone else. And if they pick another black guy, it's gonna seem like a twofer and not
Contrived.
really,
Yeah.
not really, original. So probably, I think probably they're just gonna go with the obvious candidate, which is Hillary Clinton.
Who I dislike strongly. by
Oh,
the way.
absolutely. But I think she is an excellent politician who knows what she's doing and would win if she won the candidacy.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that's probably where things are going to go. If you ask someone, your average Democrat in the United States, well, what do you think of Obama's job? They might say, well, I'm a little disappointed he didn't do X, Y, or Z, but he's trying. He's working against the Republicans, who are a bunch of dickbags, and they sort of rationalize his lack of actual progress. And you can always come back to the fact that he's the first black president and isn't that great. And yes, that is great. But on the other hand, identity politics is bullshit. Just because you're black doesn't mean your policies are going to benefit black people more. And in Hillary Clinton's case, just because you're a woman doesn't necessarily mean that your policies are going to affect women better or be better for women in any sense, really. If you are a capitalist and you are going to favor the business community, then you are not going to have a positive impact on women, and it doesn't fucking matter if you're a woman or not. But the fact that you can put a woman candidate into power or an African American candidate into power will sort of disarm the opposition into accepting, like, oh, well, that's great that, we have a president now that's A or B or C. And yes, symbolically it means something, and it's progress in a symbolic way, but what matters is if the policies that they implement actually have a beneficial impact on people generally, and that's still not the case.
I don't know. I as someone who isn't black or a woman, I don't think it would have made much of a difference if they had elected a white guy instead.
Well, no, I mean,
as far as his policies go, and as far as the response from Democratic members go, I think they would have stayed loyal to him. I think they would have been willing to look past his For instance, in this case, massive use of drone strikes, the silencing of journalists, the undermining of whistleblowers,
Not closing Guantanamo.
of all the fucking things. Not closing that one pisses me off the most.
Well, that was the one thing that he easily could have done and should have.
It was like the only thing he could have honestly done through just an executive order. And didn't even need to worry about, because he could have just picked one of his other black sites somewhere else in the world.
Yeah, and instead he says, "Oh yeah, well sure, it's un-American that we're force-feeding prisoners and
That's why we're doing
waterboarding."
it in Cuba.
Yeah, and that's un-American, and I'm with you, America. This is wrong, and if only there
Those
was
are the speeches I hate the
if
most.
only there was one person in the whole world that could do something about it.
Only I was
says
president.
the president of the United fucking States of America.
Yet that works. I mean, that kind of attitude. He's really good, and I think most American politicians get really good at expressing this kind of dissatisfaction. But it only goes so far when you're the person who is making the decision. I mean, they all pretend like my hands are tied by all these assholes around me, but they all say that. Like the Republicans say that we'd balance the budget if it wasn't for the Democrats, and the Democrats are like we'd do these amazing social programs if it wasn't for the Republicans. And I think they're both lying.
They are both lying, but I think it's not quite that simple. I mean, Bush put through over 200 executive orders, which was more than whatever number of presidents before him combined. And Obama has been very hesitant to put through any executive orders.
No, but he silenced more whistleblowers than all the other presidents
and
combined.
killed more American citizens without warrant.
Certainly isn't difficult.
But my point is that he seems hesitant to put through executive orders because he seems to really believe in compromise. And it doesn't matter.
I don't know if he does, though. I mean, we don't know what Obama actually thinks about the Republican Party.
No, we don't.
We assume that he is desiring compromise with the Republicans because that makes sense given his previous statements. But if it was just basically rhetoric, then all he's doing with the Republican Party is just politics as usual.
Well, yeah.
And then that's it. They're all playing a game of being really mad at each other, and the rest of America and the world essentially is just left watching going, what the fuck are they doing?
And all the while the wheels of capitalism turn and Wall Street makes money and rich people make money and unemployment increases and people get kicked out of their homes.
Yeah, but come on, you can't end on a downer like that.
What, the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna say, oh, everything sucks. I mean, yeah, we've been a bit harsh on the American political system.
I think it's
fair.
warranted.
Probably, but we have been short on solutions. Let's say
That's true. Well, I believe in the American people's capacity to organize together and come up with solutions collectively that work for everyone.
Yeah, I think that any solution that would come would have to require a complete change in the political process, and that isn't going to happen anytime soon, so that the main job of any American, or anyone really anywhere, who wants to change the world is just educating themselves about the issues and not just sort of giving in to the cause of the day.
And the rhetoric that they put forward and whatever they're, told to care about.
Just going through the slow trouble of convincing people of whatever position you think would actually be a solution.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that America is an important country. I mean, it's the biggest economy in the world.
We live near it.
We do live near it. And, I think that Americans should really... They should organize together and come up with better solutions and challenge the status quo and think differently and think critically about their system and not just take it for granted as the shit sandwich that it is.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.